I know that mom had gone to the rehab classes that she was ordered to go to, and shortly after she went to those rehab classes, she became pregnant and stayed clean. And I don't know if it's because she had stayed clean for so long or what kind of law happens, but she was able to get Oakley and her siblings back.
In a quiet small town in Washington, a 5-year-old girl vanished without explanation. There was no missing persons report from her parents. No Amber Alert was issued. Only a chilling statement from her sister, Oakley is no more. What happened to Oakley? And why did those who were supposed to protect her remain silent? This is the story of Oakley Carlson.
Look, time to take a stone from me.
Oh, and
No,
so
and he took his phone from you?
Yeah.
Did you have Andrew's phone?
Yeah. I was watching Coco Melon
Okay.
and Andrew take it.
and then what
Okay.
happened?
And Jordan put him back in his.
Oakley Lynn Carlson was born on December 6, 2016, in the small town of Oakville, Washington, a place where the rhythm of life seemed slow and predictable, where everyone knew each other's names, and where the sight of children playing in open fields was part of the everyday landscape. To the outside world, Oakley's birth was just another joyful arrival in this quiet community. But behind closed doors, the circumstances into which she was born were far from ideal. Her parents, Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson, were already navigating the dangerous grip of methamphetamine addiction. Both had a history marred by instability, struggling to maintain employment, battling personal demons, and falling into cycles of violence that spilled into the home. Neighbors and acquaintances would later recall heated arguments, loud enough to pierce through the thin walls of the modest house the couple called home. Family members, too, were aware of the tension that seemed to hover in the air whenever Jordan and Andrew were together. The combination of substance invasion, unemployment, and domestic volatility created an environment that was neither safe nor nurturing for a newborn. For Oakley, infancy should have been a time defined by comfort and security, by the gentle predictability of a parent's arms and a home where her basic needs were met without question. Instead, her earliest months unfolded in an atmosphere clouded by neglect. By September 2017, less than a year after her birth, Child Protective Services intervened. The reasons were tragically familiar to those who work in child welfare: allegations of parental stimulant use, failure to provide proper care, and exposure to unsafe living conditions. Oakley and her siblings were removed from the custody of their biological parents. This intervention marked a turning point in Oakley's young life, one that would shape her personality, her sense of belonging, and the way she interacted with the world. She was placed with foster parents, Jamie Joe and Eric Hiles, a couple who would quickly become more than caregivers. They would become the stable, loving figures who showed Oakley what it meant to feel safe. From the moment Oakley entered the Hiles home, the difference in her surroundings was stark. Gone were the chaotic sounds of constant conflict, replaced by the steady hum of household routines. The Hiles home was modest, but full of warmth, the kind of place where the kitchen table was always ready for shared meals, and where bedtime came with stories, tucked in blankets, and a kiss goodnight. For Oakley, this was a new kind of normal. Jamie, Joe, and Eric didn't just meet Oakley's basic needs, they invested in her emotional growth and development. They nurtured her curiosity, encouraged her playfulness, and celebrated the little milestones that might otherwise have gone unnoticed: a new word spoken, a song half sung, a drawing proudly presented. In their care, Oakley began to flourish. She was no longer the small, underweight child with uncertain eyes who had first arrived on their doorstep. Instead, she grew into a bright, healthy toddler whose laughter filled the rooms. Her personality began to shine in ways that those closest to her would remember vividly. Oakley was intelligent, not in the abstract way people often describe children, but in a tangible, noticeable way. She picked up on words and expressions quickly, loved to mimic the adults around her, and displayed a knack for remembering details far beyond her years. If you taught her something once, she seemed to lock it away instantly, ready to repeat it back with pride. She was also deeply empathetic, a trait that was remarkable for a child so young. If someone around her was upset, Oakley would try to comfort them, offering a toy, a hug, or simply her undivided attention. In group settings, she was often the one to bridge gaps, drawing shy children into play and making newcomers feel welcome. Her foster parents saw in her a natural kindness that couldn't be taught. It was simply who she was. But Oakley's charm wasn't only in her gentleness. She had an energy that seemed to bubble over in the form of boundless enthusiasm. Whether it was dressing up as her favorite characters from Moana or Frozen, or running around the yard shouting playful catchphrases like, "Waka! Waka!" from the Muppets, she embraced joy with her whole being. This liveliness made her a delight to be around, and a source of constant entertainment for those in the Hiles household. The bond between Oakley and her foster family deepened with each passing day. She wasn't just another child placed temporarily in their care, she was part of the family. The Hiles celebrated her birthdays, took her on outings, and documented her growth in photos and videos. In those moments, the outside world and the painful circumstances that had led her to them seemed far away. For nearly 3 years, this stability allowed Oakley to grow not only physically but emotionally. She learned routines, developed trust, and built a foundation of security that would be critical for her development. Yet, in the background, the machinery of the child welfare system continued to move. Despite the warnings of those who knew her best, there were discussions about reunifying Oakley with her biological parents. To the Hiles, the thought of sending Oakley back to Jordan and Andrew was fraught with concern. They had seen firsthand how much progress she had made in a safe, loving home, and they feared what might happen if she were returned to an environment still shadowed by instability. Reports of ongoing substance and unemployment trickled in, along with concerns about the parents' ability to provide consistent care. But within the system, reunification often takes precedence, a policy intended to preserve biological family ties whenever possible. In this context, Oakley's life with the Hiles represented a brief but critical chapter, a time when she was able to experience the kind of childhood every child deserves. It was a period marked by growth, safety, and joy, elements that became all the more significant when contrasted with what would follow. For those who knew her during these years, the memory of Oakley's laughter, her clever wit, and her unshakable bond with her foster family would become a lasting image, one that stood in painful contrast to the uncertainty and darkness that lay ahead. Oakley Lynn Carlson's early life is not just a backstory, it is the lens through which her disappearance must be understood. The stability she found in the Hiles home showed what was possible for her future, while the instability of her birth home highlighted the risks she faced. These two worlds, one of safety, the other of chaos, would collide in ways that would change her life forever. And as the investigation into her disappearance would later reveal, the decision to remove her from the environment where she thrived would be one of the most haunting questions in the entire case.
And then Jordan put Andrew back in his bed?
Yeah.
Oh.
Did she hit him, Oakley?
Yeah. Him dead, Nick. We do hard, Nick.
Or
Jordan.
why did she hit him?
Cause him was being mean.
Why was he being mean?
Like, whoa.
In November 2019, the Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families, DCYF, made a decision that would alter the course of Oakley Lynn Carlson's life forever. After nearly 3 years in the safe and stable care of her foster family, Jamie, Joe, and Eric Hiles, Oakley was ordered to be returned to her biological parents, Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson. It was a decision made in the name of family reunification, a policy that prioritizes returning children to their birth parents whenever possible. But in Oakley's case, this policy seemed to override common sense. The foster family, who had cared for her since she was just a baby, voiced their concerns loudly. They warned that Jordan and Andrew had not addressed the deep-seated issues that led to Oakley's removal in the first place. Use of stimulants, domestic instability, unemployment. These problems had not disappeared. In fact, multiple professionals in the child welfare system had echoed the same caution. Oakley was thriving in foster care, and returning her now could place her in danger. Despite these warnings, the system moved forward. In late November 2019, Oakley was reunited with her parents. To the outside world, this might have looked like a success story, a family brought back together after a period of struggle. But to those who knew Oakley's history, it felt like placing a fragile flame back into a storm. The months that followed offered no reassurance. By March 2020, just a few short months after her return, DCYF closed Oakley's dependency case entirely. This meant there would be no further oversight, no scheduled home visits, and no ongoing monitoring to ensure her safety. The foster family, who had once been deeply involved in her life, was cut off completely. No more updates, no more phone calls, no more opportunities to check in. Oakley had been removed from the protective web of people who loved her and placed solely in the hands of the two individuals whose actions had once necessitated her removal. That Christmas, less than a year into her return home, troubling signs began to surface. When Oakley was seen by extended family, she appeared noticeably thinner. There was a visible injury on her face, a mark that was inconsistent with the cheerful, healthy little girl the Hiles family had last known. Questions about the injury were met with vague or dismissive answers. For those paying attention, the alarm bells were growing louder. What Oakley endured behind closed doors during this period would later come to light in fragments, pieces of a disturbing puzzle provided by her surviving siblings. When questioned by authorities after Oakley's disappearance, her older sister described a household marked by cruelty. She spoke of physical Oakley being physically impacted, sometimes without clear reason. She spoke of neglect, Oakley being denied food, left hungry for long stretches of time. And perhaps most hauntingly, she spoke of confinement, Oakley being locked in a small cabinet-like space, a cell, under the stairs as punishment. These accounts painted a picture of escalating tooling and isolation. But without outside supervision, there was no one to intervene. The oversight that could have caught these warning signs had been eliminated months earlier, leaving Oakley invisible to the very system designed to protect her. By the fall of 2021, the situation reached a chilling climax. On November 6 of that year, Oakley Carlson called in a fire at the family's home. The official story was that Oakley had accidentally set a couch on fire using a lighter. It was a strange claim for a child her age, and those who later learned of it would find it suspicious. The fire was quickly extinguished, but it drew brief attention to the household. Neighbors noticed that Oakley was nowhere to be seen. Around this time, Oakville Elementary School principal Jessica Swift began making visits to the Carlson home. Oakley was a student there, and Swift had reason to check on her well-being. On multiple occasions, Swift stopped by but was told Oakley could not come to the door. The explanations varied. Oakley was in her room. Oakley was in trouble. Oakley was not feeling well. Eventually, Swift was told outright that Oakley was being punished and was not allowed to speak to anyone. Swift never actually saw Oakley during these visits. The absence did not go unnoticed, but it was on December 4, 2021, that the truth, or at least a fragment of it, surfaced in the most chilling way. That day, Jessica Swift visited the Carlson home again. Oakley's 6-year-old sister was present, and in an unguarded moment, she made a statement that would send a shiver down Swift's spine. "Oakley is no more." The words were simple, but their meaning was devastating. Swift pressed gently, but the child's tone and demeanor left no doubt that something was terribly wrong. Swift immediately contacted law enforcement, reporting what she had heard and her ongoing inability to see Oakley during previous visits. The next day, December 5, Swift followed up with the Grays Harbor County Sheriff's Office. She reiterated her concerns, explaining the pattern of absence, the strange excuses, and now the alarming statement from Oakley's sister. By December 6, police were actively involved in the case. They visited the Carlson home, questioned the parents, and quickly realized that neither Jordan nor Andrew could provide a credible account of Oakley's whereabouts. The timeline they offered was vague and contradictory. At first, they claimed they had last seen Oakley a few days earlier. Then the window shifted. Maybe it had been a week, maybe even longer. The uncertainty itself was damning. For any parent, the inability to recall the last time they had seen their 5-year-old child would be unthinkable. For investigators, it was a glaring red flag. When asked why they had not reported her missing, Jordan and Andrew gave explanations that defied logic. At one point, Andrew made a statement implying that Oakley was gone and would not be coming back. Jordan, meanwhile, offered no clear answers, and investigators later discovered that her cell phone had been factory reset around midday on December 6. The very day police became involved. The events between Oakley's return to her biological parents in 2019 and the December 2021 revelation of her disappearance tell a story of systemic failure, missed opportunities, and escalating danger. The decision to reunify her with parents who had not demonstrated lasting change set the stage. The closure of her dependency case removed all safeguards. And in the absence of oversight, the misuse described by her siblings was allowed to escalate unchecked. The fire in November 2021, the repeated inability of school staff to see her, the troubling statement from her sister, all were signals that something was deeply wrong. Yet it was only after that final, haunting phrase, "Oakley is no more," that the full weight of law enforcement came down on the case. By then, Oakley had already been missing for an undetermined length of time. The exact date of her disappearance remains unclear. What is clear is that between November 2019 and December 2021, Oakley went from a thriving, joyful child in a loving foster home to a vanished figure whose fate is still shrouded in uncertainty. The questions raised by this timeline are not just about what happened to Oakley, but about why so many people and institutions failed to protect her when the warning signs were right in front of them. Among the various theories surrounding the disappearance of 5-year-old Oakley Lynn Carlson, one stands out as both the most disturbing and, tragically, the most plausible: that Oakley died as a result of prolonged physical impact at the hands of her parents, and that her death was deliberately concealed. This theory is not based on wild speculation, but on a troubling mosaic of evidence: the statements of Oakley's surviving siblings, physical findings from law enforcement's search, and the inconsistencies in her parents' accounts. Taken together, these elements paint a picture of escalating cruelty, a sudden crisis, and a calculated effort to erase all traces of what happened. The first clues come from the voices of those who lived inside the Carlson household. In interviews with investigators, Oakley's older sister, only 6 years old at the time, described a pattern of physical impact that was both systematic and severe. She told of Oakley being physically impacted, often as punishment, and of long periods when Oakley was denied food. She recounted that Oakley was sometimes locked in a small space, a cabinet-like enclosure under the stairs, for hours at a time. Her younger brother's statements corroborated parts of this account, especially the withholding of food. For investigators, these testimonies suggested that Oakley's daily life had devolved into a cycle of control and suffering. The behaviors described fit established patterns of invasion, where neglect is combined with physical harm to break a victim's will. In children, this often leads to rapid physical decline, emotional withdrawal, and, if unchecked, fatal outcomes. The timeline points to a potential breaking point in early November 2021. On the 6th of that month, Andrew Carlson reported a fire at the family's home. The official explanation, that Oakley had set a couch ablaze using a lighter, raised immediate doubts. For a 5-year-old, starting such a fire without injuring herself or attracting immediate attention would be highly unlikely. Investigators began to consider another possibility: that the fire was not an accident at all, but a deliberate act meant to destroy evidence. Fires have long been used as a method to cover up criminal activity, whether to eliminate physical remains or to obscure the presence of incriminating materials. If Oakley had suffered a fatal injury, a fire could have served to remove traces, clothing with bloodstains, bedding, or other items bearing forensic evidence. While no direct proof of this has been made public, the suspicion persists because of what investigators found, and did not find, inside the Carlson home. When law enforcement conducted a thorough search of the property in December 2021, one of the most striking discoveries was the absence of Oakley's belongings. There were no clothes in her size, no toys, no schoolwork, no personal effects at all. It was as if Oakley had been erased from the home entirely. For a child who was supposedly still living there until recently, this was an extraordinary and troubling detail. More damning still was the discovery of blood evidence. According to investigative records, forensic teams found traces of blood inside the home, along with a partial bloody handprint. The exact location and DNA results of these findings have not been publicly disclosed, but their presence strongly suggested that some form of injury had occurred within those walls. For detectives, this was a pivotal point. The combination of missing belongings and the presence of blood aligned far more closely with a scenario of violence and concealment than with any benign explanation. Then there were the parents' own words. During questioning, both Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson offered timelines that shifted with each retelling. Initially, they suggested they had last seen Oakley only days earlier. Later, they admitted it might have been weeks. At no point could they provide a clear, verifiable account of her current whereabouts. Andrew, in particular, made a statement that has haunted the investigation. At one stage, he implied that Oakley was gone and would not be coming back. This was not the language of a parent holding out hope for a missing child's safe return. It was the language of finality. Jordan, meanwhile, remained largely silent, refusing to offer explanations, and notably, having factory reset her phone on the same day police first arrived to question them. From a behavioral analysis perspective, the inconsistencies and evasions in their statements are not simply signs of poor communication. They can be markers of deception, especially when paired with physical evidence that suggests a crime has occurred. The destruction of digital data, like resetting a phone, often points to an attempt to remove potentially incriminating records, text messages, location data, photographs, that could place a suspect at the scene of an incident or show intent. Motive is the final piece of this theory, and it is, sadly, the least mysterious. The accounts from Oakley's siblings make clear that punishment and control were central to the household's dynamic. Denying food, locking her away, and physical harm all serve to reinforce the parents' dominance over her. In those households, such behavior can escalate when the child resists, when the user's stress increases, or when the substance lowers inhibitions and heightens aggression. If Oakley's condition worsened if she became visibly injured, or if her health began to decline from sustained neglect, Jordan and Andrew may have faced a dangerous crossroads. Seeking medical help would risk exposing the invasion. Not seeking it could lead to her death. If she did die, whether from an acute incident or from the cumulative effects of invasion, the parents would have had a powerful incentive to conceal what happened. Covering up the death would serve multiple purposes: avoiding criminal charges, retaining custody of their other children, and maintaining their freedom. A staged fire could eliminate evidence. The removal of all her belongings would reduce visual reminders of her existence, and refusing to report her missing would prevent triggering an immediate investigation. In this theory, Oakley's disappearance was not a sudden, random event. It was the culmination of nearly 2 years of escalating invasion, following her return to her biological parents' invasion that ended in a fatal outcome, and was followed by a deliberate, multi-step effort to hide the truth. The siblings' testimony, the suspicious fire, the absence of her possessions, the discovery of blood, the contradictory statements, and the digital data wipe all align in a chillingly coherent pattern. It is a pattern that points not to a stranger's intrusion, nor to an accident outside the home, but to something that happened within those walls, something her parents were determined the world would never see. While the theory that Oakley Carlson died as a result of invasion is the most widely discussed, there is another line of speculation that has gained traction among some observers, one that focuses less on a sudden act of violence and more on calculated exploitation. This theory suggests that Oakley may have been deliberately removed from the area, possibly even sold, to settle her parents' stimulant debts or as part of an arrangement with criminal networks. To understand why this theory exists, we must first examine the environment in which Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson were living. Both parents had long histories of methamphetamine use. Meth addiction is not just a personal health crisis, it often destroys relationships, undermines employment stability, and creates perpetual financial instability. By the time Oakley disappeared, both Jordan and Andrew were reportedly unemployed, living in a rural part of Washington state with limited resources and, according to multiple accounts, struggling to meet even basic household expenses. In such circumstances, debts, especially stimulant-related debts, can accumulate quickly. The combination of addiction and financial desperation can push individuals into dangerous territory. Meth users often interact with local dealers and, in some cases, organized distribution networks that demand repayment not just in cash, but in whatever assets a debtor can provide. While this might typically involve stolen goods, vehicles, or property, there have been documented cases, both in the United States and internationally, where children have been trafficked or informally traded to satisfy stimulant debts. This is where the second layer of the theory emerges, that Oakley's parents may have had connections, however peripheral, to individuals or networks capable of facilitating child trafficking. While there is no confirmed evidence tying Jordan or Andrew to such networks, several factors raise suspicion. First, Jordan's actions immediately after Oakley was reported missing are telling. On December 6, 2021, the same day, police were first contacted by school principal Jessica Swift regarding Oakley's absence. Jordan's phone was factory reset. For investigators, this was a glaring red flag. Resetting a phone erases call logs, text messages, photos, location history, and other digital traces that could reveal recent contacts or travel patterns. In the context of a missing child case, this act suggests a conscious effort to hide communications or connections that might have led authorities to Oakley's whereabouts. Second, Andrew's background as a former Aberdeen police officer cannot be overlooked. Although he had been removed from the force in 2017 for misconduct, his law enforcement experience means he would understand investigative procedures, the importance of forensic evidence, and how to avoid leaving a trail. He would know, for example, which actions would immediately raise suspicion and which might delay or complicate an investigation. If Oakley had been transferred to someone else's care, legally or illegally, Andrew would be uniquely positioned to conceal that fact from law enforcement for as long as possible. Another point of concern is the absence of Oakley's belongings from the home when it was searched. While this could fit with the invasion and concealment theory, it is equally compatible with the idea that she had been moved elsewhere deliberately. If a child is to be handed over to another party, removing all personal items from the home serves to sever physical ties and create the impression to outsiders that the child hasn't lived there in some time. Supporters of this theory often point to precedent. There have been documented cases in the U.S. child welfare system where children were removed from one environment only to be placed into another that was equally unsafe, or in rare but shocking instances, where corrupt actors within or adjacent to the system facilitated illegal transfers. While such cases are not the norm, they underscore a troubling reality. The systems meant to protect children are not immune to exploitation by those with criminal intent. Within this framework, Oakley's disappearance could have been the result of a calculated exchange, not an impulsive act of violence. The motive would be transactional, erasing a debt, gaining favor with a dealer or criminal associate, or securing stimulants without immediate payment. For parents in the grip of addiction, distorted priorities can make such unthinkable choices seem, in the moment, like viable options. One strength of this theory is that it accounts for the complete absence of Oakley's remains or conclusive evidence of her death. In invasion cases that end fatally, there is often some trace of body, remains, or clear forensic proof. In Oakley's case, after extensive searches, nothing definitive has been found. If she had been removed alive from the home and taken far outside the jurisdiction, it would explain why local searches have failed to locate her. It also explains the deliberate digital erasure. The resetting of Jordan's phone becomes a logical step if there were text exchanges, call records, or GPS data showing coordination with an individual or group involved in taking Oakley. This act could also indicate a fear of being caught in a conspiracy that might carry severe legal consequences beyond invasion or neglect charges. Andrew's law enforcement knowledge is another factor that bolsters this theory. His understanding of investigative timelines, evidence preservation, and interagency coordination could have given him the foresight to eliminate or obscure certain trails before police became fully engaged. Lastly, the theory aligns with the observed behavior of both parents. The lack of urgency in reporting Oakley missing, the shifting timelines in their statements, and the general refusal to cooperate fully with authorities. If they knew Oakley was no longer within reach of local law enforcement, their inaction could stem from confidence, however misguided, that she would not be found. However, this theory is not without weaknesses. The most significant is the lack of direct evidence. While suspicious behavior and circumstantial details can point toward the possibility of trafficking or a deliberate handover, there has been no confirmed witness, surveillance footage, or communication records tying the parents to a specific network or transaction. Moreover, trafficking children from a rural area, particularly one with a missing child case already under scrutiny, carries substantial risk for those involved. The heightened media attention and public outrage surrounding Oakley's disappearance would make her a liability to any criminal organization. Even in illicit markets, the preference is for invisibility. Oakley's case was anything but low profile once law enforcement became involved. Another challenge to the theory is the behavioral profile of Jordan and Andrew, as described by those who knew them. While both had histories of neglect and substance invasion, there is little in the public record to suggest they had the organizational capacity or connections to coordinate such a complex transfer. In many trafficking cases, the perpetrators have pre-existing ties to the networks they use, ties that, so far, have not been publicly identified in relation to the Carlsons. Finally, this theory does not fully account for the physical evidence found in the home, such as the traces of blood and the partial bloody handprint. While these could be explained by past injuries unrelated to her disappearance, they also fit more neatly into a scenario involving violence within the home rather than an external removal. The possibility that Oakley Carlson was removed from the area or even sold to settle stimulant-related debts is chilling, and it cannot be entirely dismissed. The elements supporting this theory: the parents' financial desperation, their stimulant addiction, the suspicious digital wipe, and Andrew's insider knowledge of police procedure, form a chain of plausibility that investigators must consider. Yet the lack of concrete links to trafficking networks, combined with the physical evidence suggesting harm occurred inside the home, keeps this theory in the realm of speculation rather than established fact. It remains one possible explanation among several, each pointing to the same painful truth, that Oakley's fate was determined not by chance, but by the choices of the people who should have protected her most. Whether Oakley's absence is the result of a violent act followed by concealment, or a calculated handover into an unknown and dangerous world, the outcome is the same: a child vanished, her voice silenced, her story left for others to piece together from the fragments that remain. As the investigation into Oakley Carlson's disappearance unfolded, the most haunting aspect was how much and how little the evidence revealed. Pieces of the puzzle were scattered across physical forensics, witness statements, and the evasive behavior of the two people who should have been most desperate to find her parents, Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson. Yet, despite the troubling collection of facts, the case remains without a charge of homicide or manslaughter. When investigators first gained access to the Carlson home, they were struck by what was missing as much as by what they found. There were no clothes in Oakley's size, no toys, no personal effects. It was as if she had been erased from the space entirely. For law enforcement, this absence was a red flag, suggesting either a deliberate attempt to remove all traces of her presence or a much longer period since she had lived there than her parents were admitting. More disturbing still was what they did find. Forensic teams discovered traces of blood within the residence, along with a partial bloody handprint. The exact location and volume of this evidence have not been made public, likely to preserve the integrity of the investigation, but its very existence points to the possibility of injury, perhaps serious injury, occurring inside the home. Without a body, blood evidence can be challenging to interpret, but in combination with other findings, it can indicate foul play. Adding to the suspicion was the state of Jordan Bauer's cell phone. On December 6, 2021, the same day the school principal alerted authorities to Oakley's absence, her phone was factory reset. This action erased call logs, text messages, photos, videos, location history, and any stored data. From an investigative standpoint, such an act during the critical early hours of a missing child case is not a coincidence. It is a deliberate obstruction, eliminating potential leads that could have revealed Oakley's last known movements or contacts. The family's home was also the scene of a suspicious fire just 1 month before Oakley was reported missing. On November 6, 2021, Andrew Carlson told authorities that Oakley had accidentally set a couch on fire using a lighter. Investigators found this explanation questionable. For a 5-year-old to ignite furniture without injuring herself or causing immediate chaos stretches plausibility. Some believe the fire may have been set intentionally to destroy evidence, items stained with blood, damaged by violence, or otherwise incriminating. Several witnesses have played key roles in piecing together the timeline of Oakley's disappearance. Jessica Swift, the principal of Oakville Elementary School, was among the first to raise the alarm. After visiting the Carlson home on multiple occasions and not seeing Oakley, she became increasingly concerned. On one visit following the fire, she asked to see Oakley, but was told by Jordan that Oakley was in her room. Swift never saw the child, nor heard her voice, and left with a lingering sense that something was deeply wrong. It was Swift's persistence that ultimately led to law enforcement being notified. Equally vital were the statements from Oakley's siblings. In interviews, her older sister described in detail the invasion Oakley suffered, being beaten, denied food, and locked in a cabinet-like space. Perhaps most chilling was her reported statement to an adult: "Oakley is no more." This wasn't a casual remark. It was a stark declaration from a child who had seen far too much. Her younger brother confirmed parts of this account, adding to the credibility of the claims. Neighbors also played a role in shaping the investigation. Some reported not having seen Oakley for months before she was officially reported missing. In small communities, the absence of a child is often noticed, especially when other children in the household are seen regularly. These observations reinforced the possibility that Oakley had been missing, or worse, long before December 2021. Extended family members, including grandparents, also expressed concern. While some had limited direct contact with Oakley, they noted changes in Jordan and Andrew's behavior, as well as their reluctance to allow visits. These restrictions grew more pronounced in the months leading up to Oakley's disappearance. From the earliest days of the investigation, Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson were considered the primary suspects. Their histories alone painted a troubling backdrop. Both had struggled with methamphetamine addiction, unemployment, and unstable living conditions. Andrew's prior experience as a police officer added a complex layer. He knew investigative procedures, evidence collection, and how to minimize self-incrimination. During interrogations, both parents displayed what investigators often interpret as evasive behavior. They offered shifting timelines about when they last saw Oakley, sometimes narrowing the gap to days, other times admitting it might have been weeks. Neither could provide a consistent account of her current whereabouts. Jordan largely refused to engage with questioning, often falling back on silence or short, non-committal answers. Andrew's responses were similarly guarded, though at one point he reportedly made a cryptic remark implying Oakley would not be returning. The combination of silence, contradictions, and omissions created a profile more consistent with concealment than cooperation. From an evidentiary standpoint, the case against Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson is troubling but incomplete. Blood evidence and a bloody handprint strongly suggest that a violent event occurred. The erased phone data points toward a deliberate attempt to obstruct the investigation. The suspicious fire, the absence of belongings, and the testimony of Oakley's siblings all align with the theory that she came to harm in the home. However, the standard for criminal prosecution, especially for charges like homicide or manslaughter, is high. Without a body or definitive forensic proof of death, prosecutors must rely on circumstantial evidence. While circumstantial evidence can be compelling, it must form a chain so tight that no reasonable alternative explanation exists. In Oakley's case, plausible alternative theories, such as her being removed from the area alive, have not been conclusively ruled out. Additionally, some evidence is complicated by its potential for multiple interpretations. Blood in the home could come from an injury unrelated to her disappearance. The fire, while suspicious, lacks definitive proof of being set to destroy evidence. And while witness testimony from siblings is powerful, it can be challenged in court due to the age and perceived reliability of child witnesses. Prosecutors must also consider the risk of going to trial without irrefutable proof. A failed prosecution, one that ends in acquittal, would not only deny justice in the moment, but also make it far more difficult to try the suspects again, should new evidence emerge later. This is especially critical in cases involving the possible death of a child, where the stakes are as high as they can be. The absence of manslaughter or homicide charges against Jordan and Andrew comes down to one central issue: proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Even with the troubling collection of evidence, there remains no direct, confirmed link between that evidence and Oakley's death. Without a body, without a clear cause of death, and without direct witnesses to the moment of harm, prosecutors face significant hurdles. In many ways, this is the tragic reality of no-body cases. While convictions can and do happen in such cases, they require a convergence of physical, digital, and testimonial evidence that leaves no room for reasonable doubt. In Oakley's case, the available evidence, while damning in public opinion, has not yet met that threshold in a courtroom. This does not mean the case is closed. Investigations of this nature can stretch for years, especially when they hinge on waiting for new witnesses to come forward, forensics to advance, or for one of the suspects to break their silence. For now, the evidence sits like pieces of an unfinished puzzle, each one dark and disturbing, yet still waiting for the final piece that will lock the picture in place. When looking at the disappearance of Oakley Carlson, it's impossible to ignore the role of the very system meant to protect her. The Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families was responsible for monitoring her welfare and making the final decision to reunite her with her biological parents, Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson. The case has since become a stark example of how institutional pressure, policy shortcomings, and systemic neglect can intersect with devastating consequences. Oakley's foster parents, Jamie, Joe, and Eric Hiles, had cared for her for nearly 3 years. During that time, they saw her thrive physically, emotionally, and developmentally. They also had a front-row view of the troubling realities of her biological parents' lifestyle: the addiction, the instability, the history of neglect. When DCYF began discussing reunification, the Hiles family didn't stay silent. They repeatedly voiced their concerns to social workers, emphasizing that they did not believe Oakley would be safe in her parents' care. These were not vague fears, they were grounded in documented behavior. Jordan and Andrew had not demonstrated consistent sobriety or stability. There were reports of volatile arguments and erratic conduct. The Hiles family feared that returning Oakley under such conditions would be placing her in direct harm's way. They were not the only ones to speak up. Some DCYF caseworkers, according to accounts later given anonymously, also questioned whether Jordan and Andrew had made the necessary changes to provide a safe environment. They noted missed appointments, inconsistent stimulant testing, and minimal proof of stable income or housing. Despite these warnings, the department proceeded with reunification in November 2019. Why would an agency tasked with protecting children make such a risky decision? One factor, according to experts and insiders, is the growing institutional emphasis on family reunification. Over the past decade, DCYF and similar agencies nationwide have faced mounting political and public pressure to reduce the number of children in foster care. While this is grounded in the belief that children generally do best with their biological families, it has also created an environment where reunification can be pursued too quickly, sometimes at the expense of safety. Multiple former DCYF employees have spoken, often off the record, about the pressure to close cases. Caseloads are high, funding is limited, and every child successfully returned to their parents represents one less file on a worker's desk. In practice, this can mean that red flags, even serious ones, are downplayed or dismissed to meet performance metrics or budgetary goals. The Oakley case appears to be a tragic embodiment of this dynamic. Despite her foster parents' pleas and evidence of continued instability in her biological parents' lives, Oakley was sent back home under the rationale that it was in her best interest to be with her forever family. Just 4 months later, DCYF ended its oversight altogether in March 2020, severing all formal contact between Oakley and the Hiles family. Perhaps the most damning insight into the systemic issues comes from a whistleblower within DCYF, who described the agency's working culture as overloaded and under-resourced. This individual, who had direct experience with child welfare cases, painted a picture of an environment where caseworkers juggled overwhelming caseloads, sometimes 20 to 30 active cases at once. According to the whistleblower, the combination of staffing shortages and unrealistic expectations led to triage social work, focusing only on the most urgent cases while less visible, but still dangerous situations slipped through the cracks. In their words, if a child isn't bleeding in front of you or actively in the ER, the case gets pushed down the priority list. The whistleblower also alleged that internal dissent was discouraged. Caseworkers who pushed too hard against reunification decisions risked being labeled as anti-family or obstructionist. This culture, they said, made it difficult for frontline workers to challenge decisions from higher up, even when they believed those decisions endangered a child's life. When Oakley's absence finally came to light in December 2021, public outrage was swift and much of it was aimed at DCYF. How could a child vanish nearly a year after the agency stopped monitoring her, especially when multiple people had warned against her return? The agency's initial public statements were measured to the point of sounding detached. DCYF expressed general sadness over the situation, but avoided acknowledging specific failures in Oakley's case. Officials cited privacy laws that prevented them from discussing individual child welfare cases in detail, which only fueled suspicion and anger among the public. To many, the response felt like a deflection rather than accountability. Lawmakers began calling for inquiries into the department's handling of Oakley's case, and grassroots campaigns emerged demanding reform. This included proposals for Oakley's Law, aimed at ensuring that children removed from dangerous homes would not be returned without thorough, transparent safety evaluations. Behind closed doors, DCYF reportedly conducted an internal review. However, to date, there has been little public disclosure of its findings. For Oakley's foster family and the community at large, the silence from the agency felt like yet another betrayal, a refusal to confront the systemic flaws that may have cost a child her life. While Oakley's case is shocking, it is not unique. Across the country, child welfare systems struggle to balance the goals of family preservation with the imperative to protect children from harm. In some cases, the pendulum swings too far toward reunification, with tragic results. Research shows that children returned to homes with unresolved substance invasion issues are at significantly higher risk of neglect, invasion, and re-entry into foster care. In Oakley's situation, all of those risk factors were present: addiction, instability, and a history of neglect, yet they were either underestimated or ignored. It is tempting to view Oakley's disappearance as solely the result of her parents' actions, but the systemic context cannot be ignored. DCYF had both the authority and the responsibility to protect her, yet their decision-making process prioritized a reunification outcome over the clear safety concerns documented by those closest to her. The whistleblower's account underscores how dangerous an overburdened system can be. When caseworkers are too stretched to follow up thoroughly, when dissent is silenced, and when policy pressures outweigh professional judgment, children like Oakley fall through the cracks. The calls for reform after Oakley's disappearance have focused on several key areas: reducing caseloads so social workers can give each case the attention it deserves, strengthening oversight and safety checks before reunification, protecting whistleblowers and encouraging open debate within child welfare agencies, ensuring that the voices of foster families, often the people who know a child's needs best, carry real weight in decision-making. For Oakley Carlson, these reforms come too late, but her story has become a rallying cry for those determined to prevent similar tragedies. The hope among advocates is that her name will not just be a reminder of what went wrong, but a catalyst for lasting change. In the end, systemic failure is not an abstract concept. It's a chain of human decisions made within flawed institutions. Oakley's fate was shaped not only by the people who hurt her directly, but also by those who had the power to intervene and chose not to. Until that truth is confronted with honesty and action, the lessons of her disappearance will remain unlearned, and other children will remain at risk. In the wake of Oakley Carlson's disappearance, her foster family refused to let her name fade into the background noise of unsolved cases. For Jamie Joe and Eric Hiles, who had raised Oakley for nearly 3 years, the loss was more than just a mystery, it was a moral outrage. The same child welfare system that had promised to protect Oakley had failed her, and the two people most likely to have answers were refusing to speak. Faced with silence from the suspects and slow movement from authorities, the Hiles family took the fight into their own hands. Jamie Joe, in particular, emerged as the public face of the search for justice. With every interview, every vigil, and every public statement, she refused to let the narrative drift toward apathy. She spoke openly about Oakley's bright personality, her intelligence, and the joy she brought into the Hiles household, grounding the story not in tragedy alone, but in the life of a little girl who deserved better. The couple began coordinating with local media outlets to keep Oakley's name in circulation. They participated in televised interviews, radio programs, and newspaper features, knowing that public awareness is often the lifeblood of stalled investigations. Their message was consistent: someone knows what happened, and the truth will not stay buried forever. The fight for answers spilled into the streets. Community members, fueled by anger and heartbreak, joined the Hiles family in organized rallies and marches. Signs bearing Oakley's face appeared outside courthouses, government buildings, and public parks. Chants of "Justice for Oakley" echoed through small-town streets that had rarely seen organized protest before. These demonstrations served two purposes. First, they kept public pressure on law enforcement and prosecutors, making it harder for the case to fade from priority lists. Second, they reminded the broader community that Oakley's story was not an abstract news item, it was a local child, one of their own, whose fate remained unknown. The visibility also sent a message to Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson. The community was watching, and silence would not shield them from scrutiny. To further motivate potential witnesses, the Hiles family announced a reward of $25,000 for information leading to the discovery of Oakley's whereabouts. Raising such a sum was no small feat. Donations came from friends, neighbors, strangers, and online supporters from across the country. The reward was as much symbolic as it was practical. It demonstrated the depth of community commitment and created a tangible incentive for anyone with knowledge, perhaps someone hesitant, to come forward out of fear or loyalty to break their silence. While no one has yet claimed the reward, its existence remains a standing reminder that justice still has a price worth paying. In addition to the reward, the Hiles family organized fundraising efforts to support search operations and awareness campaigns. These included benefit auctions, community dinners, and online crowdfunding. The money raised went toward printing flyers, producing banners, and covering the costs of travel for advocacy events. Even without confirmed search locations, these funds ensured that Oakley's face and story were visible at public events, conferences on missing children, and on social media campaigns. In a case where years pass without answers, one of the most powerful tools is age progression imagery. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, a NCMEC, released an updated image of what Oakley might look like as she grew older. The rendering showed her with slightly more mature features, but retained the recognizable traits that friends and family knew so well. These images served a dual purpose. They refreshed public memory, preventing Oakley's appearance from becoming outdated in people's minds, and they expanded the scope of recognition. If Oakley had been taken and was living somewhere under a false identity, the age progression could spark recognition in a passerby, a teacher, or a neighbor. The release of the image reignited media coverage, bringing the case back into headlines and prompting renewed tips to law enforcement. Perhaps the most concrete outcome of the advocacy efforts was the drafting and promotion of the Oakley Carlson Act. Inspired by the specific failures in Oakley's case, the proposed legislation aimed to tighten safeguards for children reunified with biological parents after time in foster care. The bill contained several key provisions. Extended post-reunification monitoring. Instead of closing a case within a few months of a child's return to their parents, DCYF would be required to maintain oversight for a significantly longer period. This would include regular welfare checks, unannounced visits, and interviews with teachers, neighbors, and other adults in the child's life. Mandatory stimulant testing for parents with a documented history of substance invasion. The act would mandate consistent, random stimulant testing as a condition for maintaining custody. A single failed test could trigger an immediate safety review. Enhanced foster parent input. Foster parents, who often know a child's needs best, would have a more formalized role in reunification hearings. Their concerns could not be dismissed without documented review and justification. Interagency coordination. The bill encouraged greater information sharing between child welfare agencies, schools, and medical providers to ensure that potential red flags did not go unnoticed. The Oakley Carlson Act was not just about Oakley. It was about addressing a systemic gap that leaves many children vulnerable after reunification. While legislation alone cannot guarantee safety, it can create structures that make neglect and invasion harder to hide. For the Hiles family, the advocacy work has been both empowering and exhausting. Every interview means reopening wounds. Every public rally means retelling the story of how the system failed a child they considered their own. And every legislative meeting is a reminder that Oakley is still missing. Yet they persist, driven by a conviction that their silence would be a second betrayal. They have turned their grief into momentum, channeling personal loss into public action. Their efforts have inspired others as well. Families of other missing or endangered children have reached out, finding solidarity in shared tragedy and determination. In this way, Oakley's story has become part of a broader movement, connecting people across states and circumstances in the fight for child protection reform. Despite the marches, the media coverage, the reward, and the legislative push, the fundamental question remains unanswered. Where is Oakley Carlson? Until that answer is found, justice remains incomplete. The Hiles family knows that legislation can't bring Oakley back, and media attention can't solve the case alone. But they also know that inaction is not an option. Every step they take, from hanging a banner to speaking at a rally, is a refusal to let Oakley be forgotten. In the end, their campaign is about more than one child. It is about making sure the next Oakley never slips through the cracks of a system that promises protection, but sometimes delivers tragedy. It is about turning outrage into reform and grief into a legacy that saves others. Oakley's name now lives in two places: on missing persons bulletins and in the title of a proposed law. The hope of her foster family, her advocates, and her community is that someday it will also live in a courtroom verdict, one that finally answers the question they have been asking since that December day in 2021. When examining the disappearance of Oakley Carlson, the focus naturally gravitates toward timelines, evidence, and investigative gaps. Yet beneath these concrete details lies a deeper, more insidious layer: the psychology of the two people who were meant to protect her. Understanding that psychology, and the environment it created, is essential to grasping the full weight of this tragedy. Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson's history paints a troubling picture. Both have long-standing struggles with substance invasion, particularly methamphetamine. Addiction often brings instability, impulsivity, and a narrowing of priorities, where the need for the stimulant overshadows responsibilities, relationships, and moral obligations. In behavioral terms, addiction can intensify traits already present in a person's character. Reports and testimonies from those who knew them describe patterns of controlling behavior, where compliance was demanded rather than earned. This form of dominance often manifested in strict, punitive measures rather than nurturing guidance. Perhaps most chilling is the recurring theme of low empathy. People close to the family have recalled incidents where Jordan or Andrew appeared unmoved by the distress of others, including their own children. In psychological terms, low empathy combined with high control creates an environment where the suffering of others is dismissed or rationalized, a dangerous mix when vulnerable children are involved. Andrew's background as a former law enforcement officer adds another dimension. Training and experience in police work could have provided him with knowledge of investigative procedures, evidence handling, and interrogation tactics. In the wrong hands, that knowledge could be used not to uphold justice, but to evade it. For children, home is supposed to be a refuge. In cases like Oakley's, it becomes a place of fear. Psychological research shows that children in environments marked by violence, neglect, or emotional coldness are at high risk for long-term developmental harm. These harms are not only physical, such as malnutrition or untreated injuries, but also deeply emotional. Children may develop hypervigilance, constantly scanning for danger. They may suppress their own needs to avoid triggering anger. Over time, these coping strategies can turn into lasting patterns of anxiety, trust issues, and difficulty forming healthy relationships. In Oakley's case, testimony from her siblings suggests a daily life marked by deprivation and fear. Stories of being locked in confined spaces, denied food, and subjected to physical punishment point to a home ruled by control and punishment rather than love and care. Such conditions can strip away a child's sense of safety, eroding their ability to trust even those who should be their protectors. Today, Oakley Carlson remains missing. No remains have been found. No one has been charged in connection with her disappearance. The official file is still open, but the lack of resolution leaves a painful vacuum for those who loved her and for the community that has rallied in her name. Theories abound, from fatal invasion followed by concealment, to the possibility that she was removed from the area entirely. But in the absence of conclusive evidence, all that remains are fragments, traces of blood, conflicting statements, suspicious fires, and the chilling absence of personal belongings that should have been in the family home. For investigators, the challenge lies in building a case strong enough to hold up in court. For Oakley's advocates, the greater tragedy is the possibility that answers may never come and that those responsible could evade accountability entirely. The disappearance of Oakley Carlson demands a reckoning on two levels. On the most immediate level, there is personal responsibility. If Jordan Bowers and Andrew Carlson caused harm to their daughter, whether through direct violence, neglect, or enabling dangerous conditions, then moral and legal accountability rests squarely on their shoulders. Addiction, while a powerful influence, does not erase personal agency or the capacity to choose differently. But there is also the question of systemic responsibility. The decision to return Oakley to her parents was not made in isolation. It was sanctioned by the Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families. The same system that had once removed her for her safety determined that it was safe to send her back, despite documented concerns from foster parents, social workers, and the parents' own history. This raises uncomfortable questions. What weight should prior history carry in reunification decisions? How do resource shortages and policy pressures shape life and death outcomes for children? And most critically, when the system fails, who answers for the consequences? Oakley's story forces us to sit with questions that have no easy answers. Could more rigorous oversight have saved her? Would mandatory stimulant testing or longer post-reunification monitoring have revealed the danger before it was too late? Should the threshold for removing a child from a home be different from the threshold for returning them? There is also the haunting possibility that the truth may never be fully known. If Oakley was indeed harmed and her remains concealed, the chances of recovery diminish with each passing year. This uncertainty is its own form of cruelty for her foster family, for her advocates, and for every person who has marched with her name on a sign. In the end, the disappearance of Oakley Carlson is not just a story about one child, two parents, and one agency. It's about the collective obligation society has to its most vulnerable members. It's about recognizing that while personal evil can cause individual tragedies, systemic complacency allows them to happen again and again. If Oakley's fate is to remain unknown, then her legacy must be in the lessons her case forces us to confront, about vigilance, about accountability, about the courage to intervene when a child's safety is in doubt, even if it means challenging the very systems designed to protect them. Somewhere, perhaps, there are people who know exactly what happened to Oakley Carlson. Until they speak, her story will remain suspended between evidence and speculation, between grief and hope. And we are left with one final, unshakable question. When both individuals and institutions fail a child, how do we make sure it never happens again?